Hey everyone, and welcome to the ThermoWorks Demo Kitchen. Once again, it's Thursday night, so it's Thermapen Live Class, and we have something really special for you tonight. Can't wait to introduce Jess Pryles. But first, I wanted to talk just a little bit about this Thermapen One. I have a great one here in honor of Jess Pryles, the hardcore carnivore. And I thought I'd just talk for just a moment about how we actually take temperatures with the Thermapen. It's important to remember that the sensor, that micro weld, that thermocouple is in the very, very last 1/8 inch of the tip of the Thermapen. Not up here, very, very, very tip. So wherever you move that tip, whether it's through the air or water or through food, it is sensing the temperature of whatever you're moving it through. So right now it's telling me the air is 81 degrees. A little warm in the kitchen, 80 degrees now. But when you're measuring something like a bread or a steak or a brisket or a pork tenderloin, like we're going to make tonight with Apple Fennel Salad, what you want to do is you want to move that tip down past the center. We call it the thermal center because meats cook from the outside in. So do breads and other types of things. Not so much soup and candy sauce, right, where you're stirring it. But typically you want to move that sensor through the material being measured. And in that case, pulling it up through the meat, past the center, pulling it up through the meat, pulling it up through the bread, and you're watching the numbers change. That speed, that sub-second speed, and that accuracy, that 0.5 degrees Fahrenheit accuracy, will allow you to see in real time what all the gradients are. They're called gradients, right? Those different temperatures from hot to cool and then to hot again. And you'll see that when you temper a steak or a brisket or a pork tenderloin, you'll pull through it and you'll see hot, hot, cooler, cooler. And then there'll be one that's the lowest temperature that you see. So it'll go 154, 148, 146, 149. 146 is the temperature of that brisket if you're measuring a brisket, right? That's the current temperature that you want to pay attention to, the lowest temperature, the doneness temperature. And when that temperature hits your target, if it's say it's 203 for a brisket or for steak 127, that's when you pull it, right? So that's how you can use this remarkable instrument to get great results, whatever it is you're cooking. Jess Pryles, the hardcore carnivore. We've known Jess for a long time. Back in the day, she was known as Burger Mary. Hope she's not embarrassed with me sharing that, but that's what when she approached ThermoWorks, that was her original affiliate account. So she had just come over from Australia. She had kind of hit it big over there and was making her name in Texas. It's been really fun to watch Jess kind of storm America and become this beloved purveyor of Texas barbecue. Because Jess is just an amazing person. She's super fun. She's so charismatic and so precise in her study. She's taken meat science classes at Texas A&M University. She has been on the Today Show, spoken at South by Southwest. She has this gorgeous book that you can buy at thermoworks.com, Hardcore Carnivore Cook Meat Like You Mean It. Sorry, I think I got that right. She's just a remarkable person, and we're so thrilled to have her be a part of the Thermapen One Live series. And with that, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Jess Pryles. Take it away, Jess.
Thank you so much, Tim. Hi, everyone. Thanks for letting me spend dinner time with you guys. I have my gray Thermapen. Like Tim pointed out, this is my favorite color. I don't know why, it must be the neutrals. But this is such a great series to be a part of. I want to tell you guys a little bit about myself first, because there will be some of you who don't know who I am. My name's Jess. I'm from Australia. I live in Texas. Huge barbecue fan, huge live fire and grilling fan. I'm a recipe developer. I own a company called Hardcore Carnivore. You may have heard of our seasonings. And I have a cookbook of the same name. And recently I also went back to school, and I'm currently completing a meat science grad program at Iowa State University. And that was the oven telling me that it's ready. So it all started from a love of meat for me, and went to a place of just being fascinated by meat science. It's also really relevant to temperature, because learning what understanding the right temperature can do, even for steak cooking, is so valuable. It just changes the way you cook. It's probably the biggest takeaway I do from my classes. Whenever I get asked by a journalist, what are your 3 tips? One of them has to be, if you're serious about meat, get a good meat thermometer. And I've always used Thermapen since I got here to the States. So delighted to be here. This series has been full of amazing cooks like Danielle from Diva Q, Tuffy Stone. I know Matt Pittman is going to be on, and everyone is sharing such a real range of cuisines and recipes. And Mac from Grilling with Dad did some incredible burgers. And when they asked me to be a part of it, I thought, what do I want to cook? And there are showcase items that you can do. And then there's like everyday items. And what I'm going to make for you tonight is a really easy and quick, we're going to make it longer than it needs to be just to do all the explanations. This is a really easy, quick weeknight meal. So this is something I make often for myself and my husband, who's going to be reading your questions to me behind the camera. Thank you, dear. And it's pork tenderloin. We're going to be doing a seared pork tenderloin. I'm going to talk you through the tenderloin itself, which is also going to be relevant to beef tenderloin if you ever sort of buy whole ones. And I'm going to be searing it, finishing in the oven. And then just as a bonus, because we'll have the time, I'm going to throw together a really quick and easy fennel apple salad that just goes really well with the pork. Those flavors suit the pork really well. So I guess we can get started with the meat, and let's talk a little bit about that. But I get, if you want to try this at home, the only thing that you'll need for sure is a pork tenderloin and some hardcore carnivore red seasoning. And for the salad, we're going to use a bulb of fennel and a red apple. I'm using a Fuji apple, some fresh mint, some olive oil, apple cider vinegar, maple syrup, salt, and whole grain mustard in there too. So I'm going to start by grabbing the tenderloins. So tenderloins usually come like this in vacuum seal, 2 per package. Vacuum seal is really interesting. And usually, if you actually pay attention, again, talking about the importance of temperature, there's usually a guideline on here in terms of what you should cook the meat to. So we know that we use our Thermapen to cook a steak to doneness, but from a food safety perspective, being aware of your food's temperature is super, super valuable. So for example, we know that if you took, let's just imagine this was a whole piece of meat here, right? It's got bacteria all on the outside, but effectively the inside's sterile. There are other reasons that we cook pork to a different temperature than beef, but no matter what the meat is, if you took this effectively sterile on the inside and bacteria on the outside piece of meat, you ran it through a grinder, you would end up with meat that has bacteria all the way through it. So to offset that, we know that for food safety, you should be cooking ground meat to 160 degrees internal temperature. We know you should cook chicken to 165 degrees internal temperature. And historically, you used to have to cook pork to 165 degrees internal temperature, which is where all those horrible rumors about it being so dry and nasty kind of came from. Recently, the USDA, who were in charge of food safety when it comes to meat and poultry and catfish, the only fish that they regulate, but and broken eggs. So if it's a whole egg, it's FDA. If it's a broken egg, it's USDA. But in recent years, the USDA actually revised the internal temperature for pork down to 145 degrees. What that lets us do when we have a really precise thermometer is pull the meat at the exact right moment where we know it's food safe, but we're also not cooking it one moment longer than we need to. So you can really get those juicy results. So to the tenderloin. So with the vacuum seal, the meat can often be quite purplish or pale. You'll see it start to change color, more so in red meat than pork, when we take it out of that back seal and the oxygen can interact with the myoglobin proteins. One thing is there is a lot of, actually not too bad in this one, which is a good sign to look for, is how much liquid is in that bag. That liquid is called Purge. I'm going to grab some paper towel because usually I would actually do this in the sink. There's a couple of reasons. So one, I want the paper towel to absorb any of that liquid, but two, I'm going to pat these tenderloins pretty dry to make sure I can get a good sear on them. So let me open the package up. As I mentioned, there are 2 in here. So ordinarily, I'm trying not to splash pork purge all over my kitchen, but I want to tell you more about that purge. And you'll see a little bit of it here. This is actually pretty good. which means it was packed recently. So the liquid that you see on here and in any vacuum meat is called Purge, as I mentioned. What Purge is literally is the water that naturally occurs inside the meat. And the color comes from a protein called myoglobin. So it's not blood, it's myoglobin. So when people say, I don't like my steak bloody, well, there's no blood in it. So I've heard people, or I've heard of people who are under the impression that sometimes this Purge, you can see this is actually probably the least amount in a package I've seen, but it's soaked through the paper towel. But I've heard some people sort of say or think that the Purge is actually like a solution that's put in there. It's not. That's all it is. Sometimes you will see pork as what we call enhanced pork. It'll say it on the label, it has to. That just means that the manufacturer has included a brine solution in there to pre-plump the pork. So brining introduces salt and forces moisture into the meat. So it basically makes up for the moisture you lose during cooking. We see this a lot with turkeys during Thanksgiving as well. So we've got 2 pork tenderloins here. I want to do a quick anatomy lesson on pork tenderloin. And in fact, this is the same when we're talking about beef tenderloin. This is the psoas major muscle. We have the same muscle. It's in our hip flexor. The more you know. You can't unsee sometimes when you learn too much about meat science. But there's actually 2 different muscles on here. So you can kind of see that the top of this tenderloin has a slightly different shape. This is the actual tenderloin muscle. This little cap at the top here is known as the heel. You can leave that on there. On a pork tenderloin, something small like this, you're not going to notice a difference. On a beef tenderloin, you will notice a difference because it is a different muscle. So it's going to be a little less tender. The reason that these are so tender in 4-legged animals is because they're tucked away and the least used muscle. And that's why they're so tender, hence the tenderloin. What you'll also notice on here is we do have some fat, and you can see that the pieces that are sort of lifting up like this are fat, but we also have a really pronounced silver skin or epimysium, which is basically a collagen network that runs between the muscles to hold them in. The problem with them is that that collagen only starts to break down on very long cooks with a lot of moisture present. So it's actually best to remove them for these quick, shorter cooks, and here's why. You certainly don't have to, but the more that you can do to your meat before you've even started to cook it will change the results at the end. So just by cleaning this up that little bit more, we'll get an even more delicious finish. So I've got my boning knife here, my trimming knife. It's a semi-flex. And what I want to do is, I'm not going to try and get all of this. It actually tapers out as it moves down the tenderloin, but it's got a really thick part up here. So I'm just going to try and get rid of that thick part. And to do that, I'm going to push my knife underneath the silver skin as shallow as I can. You can see I've made that incision there. And I'm going to angle it up because the muscle will cut easier than the silver skin will. So I'm just going to drag my knife across and release it. You can see it there. You've got beautiful meat underneath there, and we're getting rid of that silver skin. Again, this really is an optional step, but the more you know about how to prepare your meat, can't hurt. Just do another little quick cleanup. I've got my oven preheated to 350 degrees already too, if you're cooking along at home, because I'm going to do a pan sear, and then I'm going to go ahead and just let it cook to that safe temperature in the oven. So I'm nearly done with this. I'm going to leave this. This is just fat that should render out nicely during cooking. If you hear little tippy tappies, that's my dog, who's unfortunately not tall enough to give you a cameo over the bench, but she has definitely smelled that there's meat happening here, and it's definitely relevant to her interests. So she's coming for a full inspection. But it is World Dog Day, or National Dog Day after all, so I feel like maybe I can give you a little taster afterwards. So again, look at that difference when I cut away that silver skin, and you can really reveal that beautiful pork. These are really inexpensive too, honestly, considering and how tender they are. And you get these beautiful medallions once they cook because of the shape. So I'm pretty happy with that. You can see there's that, I could nearly rip this off here and show you the difference. That's that heel muscle on the side there. We are going to cook them whole. Now, I'm going to start to warm up my pan here. Note to self, I have a regular, well, note to you guys, really. I have a regular stove over here, and obviously we've put an induction burner here for this. So fingers crossed that it works as we want it to. There have been a few hot spots in the test, so we'll see. All right, heating that up, I'm going to pop a little bit of olive oil in the pan as well while that heats up. I'm using this is actually a butter pat skillet, a cast iron skillet. I recommend using stainless steel or cast iron if you can. That gets you that really, really good sear. Let's swish this around a little bit. The other thing that's important to consider, even if you do choose to use a non-stick pan, is that you are going to have to pop it into the oven. So you want to make sure that your pan has an oven-safe handle as well. So now we've got our pork tenderloins. They've been trimmed up. Now it's time to season them. I'm just going to put this away. I can't help but try and do food safety the whole time. So always wash, and I've swapped out my rag as well. And I'm using a disposable cutting board here. So I'm going to get rid of this. This is, of course, a hardcore carnivore cutting board. I'm going to get rid of this as soon as I'm done with the raw meat, so I make sure not to cross-contam. It's particularly important for meats like pork and chicken that can have a couple of extra bio-nasties in them. So today I'm going to be seasoning the chicken with my hardcore carnivore red seasoning. It's a chicken and pork / all-purpose rub. It's got a bright red color that's all natural, and it's got pretty much classic spices, your onion, your garlic, a little bit of sugar just for balance, nice coarse pepper, and it just does really, really well on tenderloin. What are we doing here? You know what? Look, I can even check my pan temp with my Thermapen ONE. I know you're not supposed to do this, but I am. So it says it's about 140, so we're heating up nicely. Well, I'm going to season the meat right before or within 5 minutes of it going on this induction burner, because you want to season your meat either immediately before you cook it or at least 45 minutes to an hour before you cook it. If you season it and, for example, just leave it on the bench for 20 minutes, you're just letting that salt act as a reductant and pull all the moisture out of the meat. If you leave it longer, that moisture will eventually start making its way back in. But if you leave it for about 20 minutes, it's just lost to the board. So make sure you get on both sides. Season it well. You do also lose a little bit of seasoning in the pan as you flip and move things around and adjust it. So it doesn't hurt, especially when you're familiar with the type of seasoning you're using, to use a little bit extra and account for the drop off, as we call it. And the best way to sort of get everything on the board, especially sometimes you miss the sides, is just to go ahead and roll them around. No wastage, which is what we really like. I feel like it must be punishment for you to sit here and watch your dinner being cooked, not have to do anything about it. I'm going to go rinse my hands quickly, and then I can see up my pan's starting to smoke, so we're going to start to sear. All right. It's about a 12-inch pan, if you're wondering. It can easily fit 2 tenderloin. That's the sound we wanted, so that's great. Pop one in. And the other. You may have to sort of twist them a little to get them to fit the length. And as I mentioned, the first thing that I'm going to do now, I'm going to rinse these tongs off since they've directly touched raw meat. And then I'm going to get rid of this cutting board. There's nothing else raw that needs to go on it, and we want to get rid of it to make sure that we're not contaminating anything. So I'll move this over. Give my tongs a bit of a rinse. And now I've got a brand new cutting board, so I know that anything that I touch now hasn't had raw meat on it, which is a real plus. How's everyone doing out there, Chris?
Oh, they're doing fantastic.
Great. So what I'm looking for here, ideally, if you have this on the burner, I've got this as high as it goes. Ideally, what you want is a high heat. We're trying to get a really aggressive sear just to get some color on the outside. And then I'm going to put the whole thing in the oven to let it cook all the way through. As I mentioned, that magic temperature is going to be 145 degrees. That's what we're going for. You can keep sort of moving it around on the pan to make it go quicker, sort of flip it 2 to 3 times instead of just once per side. And then it doesn't take as long in the oven because you kept introducing heat to it. Or you can just do it that one flip and pop it in the oven. It'll take a little bit longer, but on the whole, I would say it's generally ready in about 20, 30 minutes, I want to say. Pardon? So the question was, how hot should the pan be before putting in the oil or the pork? Before you put the pork in. Okay. I wait till the pan is really smoking. I find that the biggest mistake I see with a lot of home cooks is that they don't let their pan get hot enough. If you've ever been into a restaurant kitchen, they have some seriously intense burners there. They cook much hotter than our stoves at home do, and they just get a different result altogether. So when you are tempted to either not make it smoke because you don't want to set your smoke detectors off or anything like that, that's often when you can have those sort of less than desirable results, especially when it comes to pan searing. Again, those restaurants have the big burners, massive exhaust fans, so you do want to get it nice and hot, basically at smoke point. I'm going to turn these over. We've got some amazing color. Let me show you. Let me see if I can show you real quick. Got a beautiful sear as I drip onto the bench. We'll get that. I flip those over. You can actually do a pork tenderloin. I nearly do them in thirds. But if you do a straight flip, it doesn't exactly cook it evenly. Because you kind of get 2 stripes down the side that aren't cooked. So I cook it the first time, and then I'll do sort of a third turn, and then another third turn, and then you'll get it perfectly that way. This is looking beautiful, though, I have to say. Beautiful. Love it. So we would have this probably once every week or 2. It's also a nice lean meat, so it offsets those, like, well, I guess you'd call them sometimes food. You can eat brisket every day if you wanted to, but you'll probably feel better if you mix it up with lean meats too. I eat meat 7 days a week. I just mix it up. So we're getting a pretty nice sear here. As I mentioned, my oven is on 350. If you were pushed, and again, because you've got that Thermapen and you can always keep an eye on what's happening with internal temp, if you were pushed for time, you could probably run it at 375 and no one would be mad about it. But just to give you an idea of where we're at, because we've only seared 2 sides so far, and I can see there's an entire side that hasn't even hit the pan yet. But to speak to what Tim was talking about, we can go in and back out, and the lowest number was 67, but you saw we went all the way to, I think it was 114 at the bottom there. So the sides that are making contact with the pan are cooking really quickly. The fact that it's not a big mussel as well means that we'll get a nice fast cook. I'm going to go ahead and turn them to that third side now. This looks amazing. Really happy with it. The other thing to remember as well, this is pretty important, is that you do have 2 different sizes at the end. You've got that thick heel mussel at one end and taper down to that thin end at the other end, and they are going to cook a little differently. Get this one turned. We do a couple more minutes here, and then we'll get them into the oven and work on our salad. And while we're here and while we have a Thermapen, let's have a look at what this one's doing. So this one's saying, this one's a little behind. This is at about 55. But again, if you can see behind this mint, we've developed this beautiful color and crust. That's not going anywhere. And that was the idea about pan searing. And then we'll finish with that gentle heat of the oven. Also, and this is probably a pretty important one, if you have a grill, you can cook this on the grill just like this too. I always set my grill up for what I call 2-zone cooking. So I have a rectangular shaped grill, just like this, and I'll pile all my charcoal to one side. You can do it on a propane grill as well. You just consider the burners instead of the charcoal. But honestly, charcoal tastes that much better. So I'll put all my coals to one side and I'll have a definitive hot and cool zone. First of all, no matter what I'm cooking, that gives me control over the heat so I can move things around as I need them. But it also emulates an oven, because when you're cooking on that indirect zone, it's just like an oven. It's that nice indirect heat. So what you could do with these pork tenderloin is start them directly over the coals, get that color just like we're doing in the pan here, and then go ahead and move them to that indirect side, close the lid, get that grill running at about 350 to 375 degrees, and just go ahead and check the pork with the Thermapen until you're at the temp that you want. So I'm pretty happy with this here. So let's get it into the oven. Let's turn this off. Move this across. And we'll just let it go there for a little while. While we're doing that, why not make it a whole meal? And as I mentioned, I love this fennel apple and mint salad. I've done a pear version as well. Because fennel and apple historically, I mean, pork and applesauce, right? Italians use a lot of fennel in cooking, like for porchetta as well. It's a lovely underused vegetable. It's really easy to put together. It looks super fancy on the plate, so people think you've worked much harder than you had. There's nothing wrong with that. The other thing I like to use is you can use a mandolin, which is one of those slices that's notorious for de-fingertipping many chefs in their time. I have one and I'm so terrified of using it on camera, just because, you know, it's one of those things of like, I know the first time I'm going to use it on camera, I'm going to have blood exploding everywhere. For that reason, if you do have one and you're confident about it and you're using the guard, you can slice the apple and the fennel really nice and thin, and it actually nearly creates like a coleslaw. It's really good if you're making like pulled pork sandwiches instead of regular coleslaw, something a little bit different. So this is what a fennel bulb looks like if you haven't seen one before. And unfortunately, most of it is not usable, but I do like to save a couple of these fronds just because they look really pretty in the finished salad. So I'll start by just picking those and popping them into the bowl that I'm using. Feel free, guys, as well, go ahead and let us know if you have any other questions. We'll be doing some Q&A at the end here, but I got all kinds of time right now. So go ahead and Chris will yell them out to me. Or maybe not yell, maybe he'll just talk at a reasonable volume.
I had a question about carryover cooking.
Yes.
And
So
how it influences when you pull it.
Carryover cooking is a real thing. And what carryover cooking basically means is that the meat will continue to rise in temperature a few degrees, even after you've taken it out of the oven or taken it out of the smoker or taken it off the grill. And so to account for that, a lot of people like to pull just a few degrees before that. So for example, if we're shooting for 145 degrees internal temperature, I might pull at 142, 143 and just let it get all the way there. There's a lot of variables that go into carryover. So for example, something like a brisket that's been in the smoker for a really long time, even though the heat hasn't been super high, is going to have a long carryover time. That's why we also rest it for a really long time, why you rest prime rib for a really long time. These guys aren't really cooking for all that long. If you wanted to, you could pull a little sooner. I generally don't go more than 2 or 3 degrees, because you just don't know. And really, if you're cooking to safe temperatures, you need it to at least hit 145 or do the pasteurization thing, which is not what's happening today. So I've picked a couple of the fennel fronds, and now I'll get rid of these guys. I'm sure someone has some creative use for all those fennel stalks, but I'm a meat cook, so I'm not going to be the one to tell you. I'm going to start slicing this fennel. You can see it nearly looks like an onion on the inside. Just going to start slicing it thinly and pop it into that bowl. It's got a weird, nearly like licoricey sort of flavor to it. Crunchy, sort of, if licorice and celery had a baby. But if you're not a anise is what I should say, not licorice, because I know not everyone's a licorice fan. But you should always try it once. So if you've never tried fennel before or fresh fennel, give it a shot. One thing I'm not is an expert chef when it comes to slicing things either. So my story is I didn't go to any culinary schools. I'm not professionally trained. I'm just taking out the very core of that fennel here just to get the other pieces. This is a little tough right in the middle. Basically just always loved to eat. Taught myself in particular how to cook great steak and great barbecue. Or at least my husband tells me it's pretty decent.
Yeah.
So, so there are a few things that I missed out on, like the knife work lesson. I can butcher a whole deer, but I cannot do that onion chop thing. It's just not in my wheelhouse. And I like my fingers, so, you know, I'd rather have them attached. But that looks pretty good. You do get to the stage where it just sort of all becomes a bulb. And that's not what we want. So this looks great. I'll move this here and you guys can see. So we've got our fennel and we've got our fennel fronds. I'll put this up a little bit. I'm going to take a quick peek at the pork, and what I might do is, the side that's still touching the metal is still going to be hottest, even though you have that ambient heat. So I'm going to go in and just turn both of those tenderloins once. And then after I'm finished my salad, I'll come back and temp them. 350 is a pretty gentle heat for this all to be happening on. So I'm not really worried about it. It'll tick along now. So I've got my apple. I pick a red apple to give it a little bit of sweetness, but you could use a Granny Smith if you want something super tart against that pork. Envy apples are also awesome. And again, just want to slice nice and thin here. Pop those in. The dressing's really simple too. It's really nice. All right. Probably use about half the apple for that was a smaller bulb. Unless you really like apple, in which case it'll be apple heavy. Again, that sweetness does really work really nicely with the pork. So let's see how this looks. You know who does love apple? Anjo. Dog loves apple. Let's see if you can hear her crunch. Ready? I hope you heard that because it was adorable. So we've got our apple, we've got our fennel. That's looking pretty good. I like that split. I guess we could do a little bit more. I always make these game time decisions. Now she's going to be forever at my feet begging for apple pieces. There we go. All right. Happy with that ratio. I underestimated the sound that she would make begging for food. I'm going to throw together a super quick dressing for this. Oh, mint, fresh mint. The hardest thing for me when I was writing my cookbook was that I'm not a measuring person. I am a grab it and kind of sprinkle it in, grab a handful and go. And when you write a cookbook, they say to you, it has to be tested and tested and tested, and then it has to be exactly a tablespoon, and then you have to convert it because is it Australian tablespoons or American tablespoons? And yes, they're slightly different. And it was so hard writing everything down. So if you're a sort of just break a bit off and go in like with the apple person, I'm here with you because that's me too. But technically this recipe, I'll read it out to you now, is going to take about 2 tablespoons of chopped mint, 2 tablespoons of whole grain mustard, half a tablespoon of maple syrup, 1.5 tablespoons of olive oil, 2 tablespoons of cider vinegar, and salt to taste. Salt's another one that's really hard for me to measure because I just know what a pinch is. That's why they tell you as well that chefs should always stick to the same brand of salt, because salt's actually done by weight, not volume. Because different brands and kosher versus table, it's all going to be different if you actually try to do it volumetrically. So I always use the same brand of kosher salt. I kind of know exactly what a pinch is. So I've got these mint leaves, and the best way, or the easiest way I think, to chop herbs like this, I even said herbs like an American. It's herbs. I'm not going to hide who I am. It's herbs. You bunch them up like this, and it's just a little bit easier to chop. We should have pretty nice pieces. It's so nice and fresh too. It just, you get this great hit of that pork tenderloin and then all this lovely freshness too. Now it's definitely time to make the dressing. I love making dressings in these little mason jars. It's just super handy to shake them all together and get them in the dishwasher. So we're going to do, I've told you the measurements. Now I'm just going to do it by sight. So it's about 1.5 tablespoons of olive oil, about 2 tablespoons of cider vinegar, which just works really nicely with that apple. Yep, that'll do. A splash of maple syrup, that'll help kind of take the edge off the acidity, and it'll also bring out the sweetness of the apples. Isn't this so cute? Totes adorbs. I'm going to do a pinch of salt. Not too much. I've got seasoning on that pork. It's really just to sort of balance and wake up the flavors again, although I do love salt. I'm a massive salt fan. And a little bit of this whole grain mustard, which looks really pretty when you incorporate it. Perfect. Did I put more? We'll put a bit more. I like seeing those little grains. This is, in fact, Grey Poupon. Thanks for asking. The other thing I like to do is you can buy whole mustard seeds at the grocery store, and you can soak them in like a beer and maple syrup mixture, and they'll plump up, and then they have so much flavor in them. They're really beautiful to use as well. So that's all my ingredients for that dressing. Now all I need to do, shake it up. Then I'm going to go check on my pork again. We'll dress the salad. Toss it all together. Feel free to use tongs. I'm a very tactile person. Make sure to get those fennel fronds off the bottom of the bowl because they look really pretty. Well done. Okay, that looks great. So you can see it's just this lovely, fresh, vibrant, crunchy salad to go along with the meat. Do a quick cleanup. I feel like you're either the type of person who cleans as you go, or you're the type of person that just say, or you're a savage, or you're the type of person who just like has this colossal mess build up. I am the type of person who cannot stand to let mess build up while I'm cooking. I think it just makes the whole idea of cleanup easier, like to have such a small thing to do at the end. It's also about being organized and prepared, so that helps too. So let's check this pork. I'm going to go and do a quick check again of the internal temp. With Tim's method. I will bring this out to you guys in a sec when it's a little bit closer. So I'm feeling pretty good about this. One of them, I'm going to spin that. Here's the other thing I'm going to do. One sec. So I've also just spun the pan around in the oven to account for the fact that all ovens will have hot spots, and your grill will too, and your smoker will too. I know my oven always hotter when it's electric oven, always hotter at the top, and usually at the back there'll be these weird hot spots. If you ever do want to test hot spots in your oven, grill, or smoker, you can do it really cheaply with white bread or just canned biscuits, and you can lay biscuits or bread over the whole rack and then just turn it on, and whatever gets dark first, you can see your hot spots. It's just that easy. So there you go. So we're just waiting on our pork. Now would be a great time if you guys have any other questions. Go ahead and pop them into the chat. The ThermalWorks crew and Chris are here to shout them out because we've got some time to go through them. And we will be resting the pork a little bit too. So I'm about to take it out and give it a rest, but let's do some Q&A in the meantime too.
So Alan asks, how does the cutting board mat feel as compared to an ingrained wood board?
And it feels very different because it's paper, not wood. I do have a board for presentation here that I thought I would take it out onto. I like these so much, I use them more than I probably should. They don't blunt your knives. They are single use. They're just, you know, so handy to have around. I'm definitely taking them to deer camp with me if you're a hunter as well. Taking them to deer camp, taking them to clean dove with, all of that. We've basically made them for hunting and fishing and camping and barbecue competitions and things of that nature. But I find them really helpful when I'm doing whole muscles like brisket. So just for today, going in and out without being able to sort of wash stuff as I go, because you guys don't want to watch me pause to clean things. It's a great solution. It's a great solution. So there you go. All right, let's take this pork out. I should be able to pop it down onto here, and we'll temp it one more time. Okay. Look at that. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Just to triple check everything. Perfect. I'm really happy with that. I'm going to let the residual heat. I guess I should check this one too. Awesome. So I think what Tim mentioned, if you missed the beginning of the video, Tim from ThermalWorks showed you how you have to pop that thermometer in and pull it back out and sort of get a medium of the temperatures, or the lowest temperature you will see will in fact be that because of the way that meat cooks. So that's a little something to get used to as well. Hi, are you here because you smelled me take the meat out of the oven? We get some foil just to retain the heat. Now I'll get a more traditional board just to rest it onto, so I've still got a lot of room in front of me. Actually, let's go straight on here. Why not? Stop getting something else dirty, hey? So you can pop those straight down. It's food safe ink on here, by the way. We have been asked that question before. And I'll just loosely temp in the foil. Now, let's talk about why we're going to rest it. So meat, I think resting meat is one of the most contentious things out there, because usually you're that person, at least when it comes to steak, you either want it hot or you prefer it be slightly cool and juicy. That's one of the reasons reverse sear got really popular, is because you didn't have to choose anymore. You rest during the reverse sear method halfway through, so you kind of get the best of both worlds, but it just takes forever to cook. If you think of meat like a bundle of wheat, we have these muscle bundles that make up the actual meat. And it's a bundle that makes up another bundle that makes up the big whole muscle. And it has all of that connective tissue and epimysium and perimysium and those silver skins that I was mentioning the whole way through. But what happens, just like when that muscle was alive, is when we apply heat, it contracts. So it contorts and contracts, and it squeezes itself into its contracted state, which then forces all of the free and bound water, because muscles are mainly made up of water, to the very edge of the structure. when you let the meat rest, you allow it to slowly relax, literally to relax, and that creates spaces between the muscle fibers where that water can redistribute. Whereas if I were to cut it immediately, I would see a lot of that water be lost to the board. Now, again, some people aren't as concerned about that. They're like, don't care, starving, want it. No one's going to judge you if you take this out of your oven, if it temps at the correct temperature and you're ready to go. But if we can give it a bit of a rest, let's, right? How are the questions going? We good?
Yeah. Somebody asked about your seasoning creation process. How do you know when it's ready to go?
Someone asked, if you guys can't hear him, about my seasoning creation process and how do I know when it's ready to go. Literally, I stand here like a mad scientist with a whole bunch of raw spices and put things together. And that's how I started the very first hardcore carnivore. Black was our very first flavor. Red was our second. And it was literally me putting together the way that I thought a steak seasoning should taste, or the way that I thought an all-purpose seasoning should taste. And sometimes that can be really hard to translate because we've got so many crazy ingredients in our house and our kitchens that it doesn't always translate to a commercial product. But in this case, I worked with a great producer. We use really high quality ingredients, which makes a big difference because, like anything, there are really good quality spices and there are really cheap spices, and you really can taste the difference. The same as select versus prime meat, or really good quality meat to somewhat questionable meat. So I basically have an idea of how I think something should taste. We just released a new seasoning called Tex-Mex, which we recommend for things like fajitas and tacos. So I know what I want fajitas and tacos to taste like. And I just kind of tinker like a mad scientist until I get the flavors that I want. And then we go ahead and do a test batch of it and make sure that it tastes good in a variety of cooking methods. So does it taste good on the grill? Does it taste good pan seared? Does it change flavor profile? Do we need to use too much of it? Is there too much salt? And you sort of start tweaking from there. So it's a fun process, but you can nearly get sick of the new flavors by the time they launch. But I will say we've been eating a lot of Tex-Mex, so that's been really lovely. So let me go ahead and cut into this since we're all just here desperately waiting for it. You could give another 5 minutes or so, but I think we'll be pretty right here. What I am going to do is get a plate, get it ready. I'm going to get a bit of this salad on here. Pretty. Leave some room for the main event though, right? Hopefully you guys can see that. Is that in shot? He's playing with the dog. He's not even listening to me. Can you see the plate? Can everyone see the plate? Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, we've got our beautiful pork tenderloin here. You can see we've got that gorgeous color we got from the pan searing. You can see some of the juice on the board here. Not overly concerned about that. Now, when you cook pork properly to 145 degrees, it actually should be slightly pink in the middle, just like this is. This is perfectly cooked. That scares some people because they're still used to that older temperature, but we know that it's safely cooked because we use our Thermapen ONE. So we don't have to worry about things like, oh, I'm not really sure. Does the color say? Does it not say? So I can go ahead and plate this up. Ancho is fully invested. And there you have a beautiful pork tenderloin with a fennel, apple, and mint salad. I mean, this is your dinner, so it's super easy to put together, as I mentioned. This pork is just cooked perfectly. It's moist, it's tender, it's not dry because of this guy. And we know it's safe. What more could you want? Any last call for questions? Otherwise, we'll throw it back to Tim. We're all good? Thank you guys so much for joining me here. I hope that you make this in your own homes. Do let me know. You can find me on social media at Jess Pryles, at Hardcore Carnivore. You'll see me preaching the gospel of the Thermapen. Do let me know if you make it. Thanks for having me, and thank you to ThermoWorks for putting on this amazing series.
Thank you. That was amazing, Jess. That looks gorgeous. I wish I could try it. And thanks for doing such a great job teaching everybody how to get proper results with their Thermapen One. Hey, be sure to tune in next week. We'll be drilling down on brisket next week. It's a big week. Jeremy Yoder of Mad Scientist Barbecue is going to take you through all the ins and outs, the scientific approach to the perfect brisket. You won't want to miss it next Thursday. Take care until then.